Have you ever looked at an old photo and felt like you could almost hear that person laughing, see them running down the street, or smell the flowers they picked on the way home? That's how it feels when you learn about Elsie Frost. She wasn't just another schoolgirl in a uniform. She was a bright, hopeful 14-year-old who truly believed the world was full of good surprises. Elsie was born in 1951 and lived with her family in Wakefield, a small town in West Yorkshire, England. It was a place full of narrow streets, old stone houses, and green fields where children played until sunset. Elsie loved to wake up early, even before her brothers, John and Colin. She liked looking out her window at the quiet morning sky, breathing in the fresh air that smelled like damp grass and chimney smoke. Her mother, Edith, often found Elsie already dressed and ready to help in the kitchen. On weekends, Elsie helped bake scones and loved getting flour everywhere. She would laugh when her mother scolded her softly, saying, "Elsie, you're messier than the whole bakery." Elsie would promise to clean up, even though she usually forgot, leaving little white handprints on her skirt. Elsie had a special green notebook that she carried everywhere. She wrote her dreams in it, ideas for new inventions, lists of stars she wanted to learn about, and small poems about flowers she found near the canal. Her dream was to become a teacher one day, maybe even a scientist. She believed she could make big changes in the world, and she held on to that dream tightly. She also loved spending time with her dad, Arthur, who worked on the railway. After long shifts, he came home tired and quiet, but Elsie always found a way to bring him back to life. She would sit on the floor beside his chair, reading her schoolwork out loud and asking him funny questions to make him laugh. Her brothers sometimes teased her and called her the little professor, but they were proud of her and always looked out for her at school. Elsie wasn't just about books and science. She loved being outdoors. One of her favorite places was the sailing club near Horbury Lagoon. She started going there on weekends in 1965. She enjoyed helping carry the sails, feeling the wind on her face, and talking with her best friend, Maureen. The two girls shared sandwiches, giggled over small secrets, and dared each other to run along the water's edge. Elsie loved the smell of wet leaves, the sound of sails flapping, and the feel of cold water splashing on her ankles. She often took long walks alone along the canal on her way home. Elsie called it her thinking path. The path was lined with bushes and wildflowers, and she liked to pick a few on the way, always choosing one to put in the small vase beside her bed. Her favorite was a bluebell she named Bluey. Every night before bed, she carefully placed her green notebook under her pillow, as if it were a secret treasure box. Elsie's teachers noticed her kindness too. She helped shy kids join games, shared her lunch if someone forgot theirs, and always said thank you. She had a gentle way of making people feel seen and safe. Even though she was young, she carried herself with a quiet confidence. On October 9th, 1965, Elsie got up like any normal Saturday. She helped her mother in the kitchen, packed her lunch, and carefully chose her outfit, a skirt she liked, and her favorite ribbon to tie her hair. She planned to spend the afternoon at the sailing club with Maureen. She left home with her green notebook in her bag, full of ideas she wanted to share later. When we remember Elsie Frost today, it's important to see her not as a headline or a sad story, but as a real girl who loved science, wildflowers, and making people laugh. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend who filled her home with warmth and tiny bursts of joy. Her life was full of small, beautiful moments that showed who she truly was, a bright, gentle soul, ready to discover everything the world had to offer. Even though Elsie loved her quiet walks by the canal, small things started to bother her as the days moved closer to October 9th, 1965. The canal path, which she once called her thinking path, slowly began to feel different. Elsie shared her feelings with her best friend Maureen during their sailing club afternoons. One day, as they sat together eating their sandwiches, Elsie said, "I keep feeling like someone is there when I walk home. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks." Maureen tried to laugh it off and told her not to worry so much, but she noticed that Elsie seemed more distracted than usual. A few neighbors mentioned seeing a man standing near the tunnel by Horbury Cut Road. He wore a heavy gray coat that looked too thick for early October. Some people said he had a slight limp and often stood in the same spot for hours, just watching. In a town like Wakefield, where everyone knew each other, people didn't imagine real danger. They thought it was just a lonely man or someone passing through. At school, a boy who liked Elsie had started acting strange. He waited by the school gates for her, and sometimes he followed her after class, trying to talk to her. Elsie always stayed polite, but she began choosing different exits to avoid running into him. Once at dinner, she mentioned it to her brother John, who teased her, saying, "Sounds like someone has a secret admirer." Their dad, Arthur, quickly stepped in and told John to stop joking. Elsie laughed along to keep things light, but inside, she was starting to feel uneasy. Her small habits at home also changed. Elsie, who used to keep her bedroom curtains open to watch the stars, started closing them before it even got dark. When her mom asked why, she simply said, "I just want to keep it cozy." Edith felt something was wrong, but didn't push her daughter for answers. Elsie also began coming home later from the sailing club, waiting for Maureen so they could walk part of the way together. But some days, Maureen had to leave early, and Elsie still chose the canal path. Even though her parents always suggested taking the longer main road, Elsie felt attached to her favorite shortcut. She told her mom once, "I'll be fine. It's my thinking time. I love that path." Her mother sighed, but didn't force her to change her routine. A few days before October 9th, Elsie told her dad at breakfast that she might start using the main road home more often. Arthur felt relieved and encouraged her, saying it was a safer choice. But deep down, Elsie didn't want to let go of the little moments of peace she found by the water. She had always felt free there, like she could leave all her worries behind. On October 8th, the day before everything changed, Elsie and Maureen spent a long afternoon at the sailing club. The air was crisp, and the trees around the lagoon had started turning orange and yellow. Elsie looked happy on the outside, laughing and joking as usual. But Maureen noticed that she kept glancing toward the tree line, as if she expected someone to appear. When Maureen asked if something was wrong, Elsie brushed it off with a small smile and said, "Just thinking about tomorrow's homework." Looking back now, each small detail feels like a missed sign. The closed curtains, the nervous glances, the boy waiting at the gates. All of these were warnings hidden in plain sight. At the time, they seemed like small pieces of ordinary teenage life. Nobody thought danger could be waiting on such a familiar path. Elsie's family later wondered if they should have pushed her harder to take the main road or asked more questions about her worries. But in 1965, people felt safe in their small towns. They believed that kindness and trust were enough to keep everyone protected. These quiet changes in Elsie's life showed a young girl trying to balance her love for freedom with her growing fears. Each day, she held on to the hope that her world was still safe, that the canal path would always be her special place to dream and breathe. Even though Elsie loved her walks along the canal, small warnings had started to build up, almost like quiet footsteps behind her. In the weeks before October 9th, 1965, Elsie was still that bright, kind 14-year-old girl who carried her green notebook everywhere. But something in her eyes had started to change. She spent most of her weekends at the Horbury Lagoon Sailing Club with her best friend, Maureen. The two girls had grown even closer that autumn. They loved watching the boats slide across the water, the sails moving gently with the breeze. Elsie often sat on the edge of the dock, with her feet dangling just above the water, her notebook on her lap, scribbling ideas and poems. But lately, even in her favorite place, she seemed distracted. On September 25th, 1965, Maureen noticed that Elsie kept glancing toward the trees near the edge of the lagoon. When asked about it, Elsie laughed softly and said, "I thought I saw a man standing there, but it's probably nothing." Maureen didn't think too much of it at the time. In a small town like Wakefield, it was easy to believe that everyone nearby was friendly. At school, a boy in her year had become a quiet problem for her. He had once asked her to a local dance and when she kindly said no, he started showing up near her classroom door and waiting at the gates after lessons. Elsie always handled it politely, but she began to feel uneasy. On September 30th, she told her brother John at dinner, "That boy waited for me again today. It's starting to feel weird." John teased her at first, but their father, Arthur, gave him a sharp look and told him to leave Elsie alone about it. By early October, Elsie started making small changes at home. Her mother, Edith, noticed that she started closing her curtains as soon as she came home from school, even when it was still bright outside. When asked why, Elsie would say, "It just feels better this way." Edith felt a knot in her stomach, but didn't push her daughter for more. Elsie also began packing up her things more carefully at the sailing club. She used to leave her shoes and bag in a pile without a second thought, but in those final weeks, she started keeping her green notebook zipped tightly inside her bag and tying her shoes neatly before walking home. On October 2nd, she waited almost an hour longer than usual, hoping Maureen could walk with her. But Maureen had already left, so Elsie finally set off alone, taking her usual shortcut by the canal. She told herself it would be fine. There were also quiet rumors among neighbors about a man in a gray overcoat. People said he had been seen near the underpass along Horbury Cut Road. Some noticed that he wore the same coat even on warmer afternoons, and that he had a limp. But most people dismissed it, thinking he was just a harmless wanderer or someone passing through town. Wakefield wasn't the kind of place where people believed something truly bad could happen. At home, Arthur and Edith often told Elsie to use the main road home instead of the canal path. On October 5th, Arthur reminded her again during breakfast. "It's better to be safe, love." Elsie smiled, promising she would think about it. But deep down, she felt attached to her thinking path. That route by the water gave her a sense of freedom. She loved the sound of the water, the way the leaves swirled in little circles, and the quiet that let her dream up new ideas. On October 8th, the day before everything changed, Elsie and Maureen spent extra time together at the sailing club. The sky was a soft gray, and the air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke drifting from nearby houses. Elsie seemed happier that afternoon. She helped fold the sails, ran along the edge of the water with Maureen, and even wrote a short poem about the changing trees in her notebook. But even then, she kept looking toward the trees, scanning the path as if checking for someone. Later that day, when they sat down to eat their sandwiches, Maureen asked if something was wrong. Elsie looked down at her hands for a moment before answering, "I just feel like someone is following me sometime. Maybe it's silly." Maureen didn't know what to say, so she gave her a quick hug and told her to stay close on the way home next time. Each of these little moments, the boy at school, the closed curtains, the gray coat, the worried glances, were like puzzle pieces that nobody realized belonged together. Everyone saw Elsie as careful, bright, and strong. No one could imagine that her quiet fears were warnings. In a small town, it was easy to trust that nothing truly bad would find its way into ordinary lives. Elsie held on to her love for her favorite path, believing it would always stay safe and peaceful. She never let go of her trust in the small beauty of the world around her, even when the shadows started to feel too close. On October 9th, 1965, Elsie Frost woke up in her family's home on Eastmoor Drive in Wakefield like it was any other Saturday. The morning was cool and carried the smell of damp leaves and chimney smoke drifting through the neighborhood. Elsie helped her mother, Edith, in the kitchen, carefully measuring flour for the scones they often made together. She still managed to get flour on her hands and skirt, laughing as she wiped it away. Edith shook her head with a soft smile, watching her daughter move around the kitchen so full of life. After breakfast, Elsie went upstairs to get ready. She chose her favorite skirt and a neat blouse. She tied her hair back with her ribbon, looking at her reflection in the mirror as she carefully checked her hair one last time. She packed her green notebook into her bag, along with her lunch and her sailing shoes. Her father, Arthur, reminded her again, "Remember, love, take the main road home today." Elsie looked up, smiled gently, and said, "I will, Dad." But deep down, She probably knew she would take her beloved canal path again. Around midday, she left to meet Maureen at the Horbury Lagoon Sailing Club. The sky that day was gray, with short bursts of sun shining through. The wind carried the smell of wet earth from the fields nearby. Elsie loved days like this. At the club, she helped pull sails from the water, feeling the rough ropes against her hands. She and Maureen shared jokes and small stories, talking about schoolwork and dreams of traveling. Elsie wrote a few quick lines in her notebook while waiting for her turn to help. Around 3:45 p.m., Elsie began to pack up her things to head home. She waved goodbye to Maureen, who told her to be careful and teased her, saying, "Don't get your shoes too muddy today." Elsie laughed and promised to tell her all about her walk next time. Instead of taking the main road, Elsie turned toward the canal path, her favorite shortcut. The path was covered with fallen leaves, damp and sticking to her shoes. The water beside her reflected the gray sky, moving gently in small waves. As she walked, she probably thought about her notes and the sailing adventures she wanted to write about later that evening. Near the end of the canal path was an underpass beneath the railway line off Horbury Cut Road. The steps there were always a bit slippery, covered in moss and wet leaves. As she reached this spot just before 4 p.m., something unexpected happened. Someone was waiting. It's believed that Elsie was suddenly approached from behind. She tried to protect herself, using her hands to push away, but she couldn't get free. Even though she was hurt, Elsie didn't give up. She managed to crawl up the steps, trying to reach the road above for help. Her green notebook fell from her bag along the way, its pages open, showing her handwriting and small drawings. 2 young boys, who were playing nearby, saw her and ran for help. One stayed with her, repeating, "Someone's coming, hold on." Those words stayed with the town for years. When her father, Arthur, arrived at the scene, he saw Elsie's school bag on the ground and recognized her sailing shoes nearby. He fell to his knees, calling her name again and again. Edith arrived moments later, her hands shaking as she reached for Elsie's ribbon lying in the grass. People around them stood in silence, many unable to speak, as the reality of what had happened began to spread through Wakefield. Police arrived quickly and began searching the area. They found Elsie's belongings scattered, her green notebook, her lunch, and one of her shoes left at the bottom of the steps. Each item felt like a piece of her story frozen in that moment, reminders of a bright, gentle life interrupted on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. That day, the entire town of Wakefield felt the world shift. Parents began holding their children closer, and neighbors started locking doors they once left open. The canal path, once a peaceful shortcut, turned into a place people avoided as much as possible. For her family, the loss of Elsie was not just the loss of a daughter or sister. It was the loss of her laughter in the kitchen, her soft voice reading aloud by her father's chair, and her small notes scribbled late at night under her pillow. Her green notebook, now left behind and torn, symbolized dreams she never got to finish, poems she didn't get to share, adventures she never took. The events of October 9th, 1965, left Wakefield forever changed. Elsie's spirit, though, stayed in every corner of her home, in the fields where she picked wildflowers, and in the pages of her green notebook that her mother held close for years afterward. When the police arrived on October 9th, 1965, at the railway underpass near Horbury Cut Road, they quickly realized this was not something the small town of Wakefield had ever faced before. Officers began combing the canal path and surrounding fields for any clue that might explain what had happened to Elsie Frost. People gathered near the cordon, whispering to each other in shock. Parents hurried their children away, some holding them tighter than they ever had before. The very next morning, October 10th, 1965, West Yorkshire Police started one of their biggest investigations. Over 12,000 people would eventually be questioned in the months that followed. Officers knocked on doors day and night, asking if anyone had seen a man wearing a gray overcoat near the underpass. A few people remembered seeing a figure standing there in the days leading up to October 9th, Some described him as having a slight limp, while others said he looked like he was waiting for someone. A piece of cardboard was found at the scene. Investigators believed it might have belonged to the person responsible, but no clear fingerprints were discovered on it. Elsie's green notebook was collected carefully. Some pages were damp and torn, her handwriting still visible. Officers read her notes, hoping they might give some hint of a person she feared or someone she mentioned, but there were only her poems and lists of star names. As police worked, day after day, they focused on every possible lead. One man, a local laborer named Peter Pickering, quickly stood out. In 1972, Pickering would later be found guilty in another serious case involving a young woman. At the time, he was known to be in the area and was said to have a gray coat. He also had a history of troubling behavior. Despite this, there was no solid evidence connecting him to Elsie's case in 1965. Another possible suspect was a man seen running away from the canal steps shortly after Elsie was found. Witnesses described him as being in his late 20s, with dark hair, wearing a long coat. Police searched for him for weeks, checking rail tickets and local records, but he was never found. Throughout the investigation, many letters came into the police station. Some claimed to know who was behind it. Others offered cryptic messages, as if trying to scare the officers. Police checked each letter carefully, but none led to real answers. Each false lead brought more pain to Elsie's family, who were holding on to every hope that the person responsible would be found. Elsie's father, Arthur, spent many evenings walking near the canal after the incident. Sometimes he stood at the steps where Elsie fell, staring into the water. Neighbors saw him, but didn't know what to say. Her mother, Edith, kept her room exactly the same, with the green notebook resting on her pillow. They both believed that someday, someone would come forward with the truth. Her brothers, John and Colin, felt the weight of unanswered questions growing heavier every year. Colin, especially, would not let go of the fight. In later years, he wrote letters to officials, asking them to look at the evidence again and keep her case open. In 2015, 50 years after Elsie's passing, West Yorkshire Police announced they would reopen the case using new forensic technology. It was the first time in decades that the family felt a real sense of hope. Officers collected new samples, checked for fibers, and reviewed old witness statements. They hoped modern science might reveal something missed in 1965. Investigators also took a new look at Pickering after his later conviction and examined whether he had any connection to Wakefield in 1965. Sadly, despite strong suspicions, there still wasn't enough evidence to charge him or anyone else. By 2019, after 4 years of renewed investigation, the case was closed again. Detectives announced they had exhausted all possible leads. For Elsie's family, it was a painful moment. They had believed for so long that an answer was waiting just around the corner. Even without a clear resolution, the investigation left a deep mark on Wakefield. Neighbors became more watchful, and parents stopped letting their children walk alone on quiet paths. The canal path where Elsie once felt most free slowly turned into a place of sadness and fear. The search for truth showed the strength of Elsie's family. Arthur and Edith carried on, keeping her memory alive in their home. Colin dedicated much of his life to making sure his sister was not forgotten, speaking at meetings and sharing her story wherever he could. Elsie's case reminds us that even when we think we know our small towns and familiar streets, hidden dangers can exist. Her story also shows the powerful love of a family that refused to give up, even when the world offered no clear answers. In every unanswered question, we see a family's fight to hold on to hope and a community's promise to never let a bright young girl's light fade away. After October 9th, 1965, nothing in Wakefield felt the same. The narrow paths, once filled with the cheerful steps of children, turned quiet. Parents began walking their children home from school, and neighbors started watching out their windows more carefully. Elsie Frost's story spread through town like a cold wind, changing how people saw each other and their own sense of safety. In the Frost family home on Eastmore Drive, the loss of Elsie left a silence that nothing could fill. Arthur, her father, often sat by the window long after sunset, staring out at the empty street. He would sometimes walk to the railway underpass where Elsie was found, standing quietly, as if waiting for her to come back up those steps, smiling, with her green notebook in hand. People in town saw him there, but no one knew how to comfort him. Edith, her mother, kept Elsie's bedroom exactly as it was on October 9th. Her school books stayed stacked on the desk, her favorite skirt still hung neatly in the wardrobe, and her small flower vase on the windowsill held a dried bluebell, the last one Elsie had picked. The green notebook remained on her pillow, its pages full of dreams and gentle words that felt like echoes of her voice. John and Colin, Elsie's brothers, felt the loss in their own ways. John struggled to talk about his sister, holding on to his memories in private. Colin, on the other hand, felt a strong responsibility to keep Elsie's story alive. As he grew older, he wrote letters to local officials, attended meetings, and spoke to journalists. In 2015, 50 years after Elsie's passing, it was Colin's voice that helped convince West Yorkshire police to reopen the investigation. Even though the case was closed again in 2019 without a final answer, Colin's efforts kept her memory in the public eye. His commitment showed a brother's deep love, the kind that doesn't fade, no matter how many years pass or how many questions remain. The town of Wakefield also changed in response to Elsie's story. Community leaders worked on improving safety measures, such as adding lights along quiet paths and encouraging children to walk home in groups. Local schools started teaching students about staying aware and looking out for each other. For many in Wakefield, Elsie's story became a reason to check in on neighbors, to pay closer attention when someone seemed worried or different. People who had once left doors unlocked started turning keys at night. Friendly waves turned into careful glances, and a strong sense of trust turned into cautious watching. Elsie's story also spread beyond Wakefield. Over time, it was shared in newspapers, radio programs, and eventually documentaries. Each time her story was told, new people learned about her life, not just the sadness, but the bright, kind spirit she carried, her love for science, her gentle way of including shy classmates, her dreams of becoming a teacher. These pieces became just as important as the investigation itself. In her room, Edith would sometimes sit on Elsie's bed, holding the green notebook and reading her words. She once told a family friend that reading her daughter's writing felt like hearing her breathe again, even for a moment. Those words were her way of keeping Elsie close, like a quiet conversation between mother and daughter that no one else could hear. When the case was reopened in 2015, there was a small spark of hope that justice might finally come. Detectives used new technology to re-examine fibers and samples, searching for something missed back in 1965. Colin stayed involved every step of the way, refusing to let Elsie's story be forgotten in a file. When the investigation ended again in 2019, the disappointment was heavy, but it did not erase the years of love and fight her family had shown. Elsie's legacy is more than an unsolved case. It is the story of a young girl who loved to dream big, a family who refused to let go of her light, and a community forced to grow stronger together. It is about parents learning to listen to small fears, about brothers standing up for their sister's voice even when the world feels silent, and about the power of keeping someone's spirit alive through shared memories. Today, when people in Wakefield hear her name, they don't just think of what was lost. They remember a girl who loved stars, who helped her mother bake, who picked wildflowers and believed in the goodness of the world. Elsie's story reminds us to pay attention to each other, to hold on to the small moments of kindness, and to protect the dreams of those we love. In the end, we don't just remember Elsie for what happened on one October afternoon. We remember her for every smile, every poem, every piece of hope she left behind. By telling her story, we make sure her light keeps shining, and maybe, in that light, we learn how to be a little more gentle and watchful with each other.